Gang, as you've probably noticed, there is a lot of hate when it comes to presets within the photography community, which is quite mad because every single photographer that I know uses presets because it's such an easy, time-effective way to create a consistent look within our images. Because if you imagine what it takes to create a consistent look, it's consistent editing or general edits that we do that we can then adapt to the specific images. And I think that presets get a bad name because of the great value preset packs. This preset pack has 100 different presets that you're going to absolutely love, and look at this amazing edit it does on this specific image. And that's where I think the issue is because presets like these packs that are built to sell, built to show you that it's delivering value, they're too hyper specific. They only work on that one image that you see on the website. It's not going to work across a broad spectrum of image. And so in my opinion, it's way better to get presets that are just a single preset that is built to work across a plethora of different images. And so in this video, we're going to run through a bunch of different images that I've applied my Kodak Portra 400 preset to, which was built to be used across a bunch of different images like they should be. And I've adapted each image so it shows up a common mistake or challenge that I have whenever I'm applying presets, so we can understand how we can fix these images and then create that beautiful, consistent look across all of our work. But please bear in mind throughout all of this, don't look at the specifics that I'm doing, but try to understand the principles. And I'm really going to try to drive that in throughout this video. And so if you don't know who I am JP, and I'm a full-time professional photographer creating content for the biggest brands across the world. And I've also written a book with everything that I wish I knew earlier in my photography process. So if you find anything in this video useful, then consider checking out Street Tools. And if at the end of this, you're like, what? I don't quite remember all of that. I've got a digital PDF that you can download on my website, link down below, that has everything that I'm going to cover within this video. So let's get into this. Cool, so we are now in Lightroom and we are going to apply the preset, and boom, you apply it, and it gives this horrible, intense orange feel. And I know that I've had this happen to me many times before, often in environments where there's indoor lighting, because artificial light is often warmer in color, or you apply it at sunset where you've got that beautiful golden light, but your camera's auto white balance goes absolutely crazy. And so when this happens, I used to think that my presets are broken, but in actual fact, we need to consider the color temperature. So this slider up here. And so if you look at an image and it feels too orange, too yellow, the first thing I would play with is reducing the color temperature. And as you can see, we go from something that's very intense, very weird looking, to this, which feels way more realistic, but still importantly holds the character of the image. And so it's important to be subtle when making these adjustments. And it's funny because we also get the opposite problem. So in this image, I'm gonna apply the preset. It looks stale, it looks old, but not in like a cool way. It kind of just looks a bit worn out, a bit lifeless. And that's because the image is slightly too blue. So we can exaggerate it by turning down the color slider. But in order to correct it, we want to increase the color temperature. And you see how it goes from being very like clinical, very not nice, very harsh feeling, to being quite warm and quite inviting. And so if your images start looking too orange, bring down the color temperature. If you start looking too blue, bring up the color temperature. And so that's reasonably simple. But something that I find is always way more difficult to notice is tint. And so the easiest way to know whether your tint is wrong is by looking at the skin tones of your subject, or just like people in general. And so take this for example. We apply the preset. Ugh. He just doesn't look nice at all. And you go, okay, well maybe that looks a little too warm. Let's cool it down. And then he just looks really pale and really horrible. When that starts happening, you then need to start thinking, okay, it's not the color temperature, it's the tint that needs adjusting. And so when you start thinking, okay, the tint must be an issue because it doesn't fix it if I adjust the color temperature. If you start looking at their skin and you go, he looks a bit green, a bit jaundiced, a little bit ill looking, that's often the cause of it being slightly too green. So we then need to start adding in some magenta. And so you see how I pull it up, all of a sudden he now looks way nicer. And if we adjust the color temperature, you see how his skin doesn't start looking too horrible too quickly. But then how do you know if you need to add more green in? Well, ta-da! We have got this example where he's starting to look a bit purple. And so you can see it's subtle. If you start looking at the whites just feel a little bit off. And if he looks a little bit sunburnt when messing around with the colours, you can assume that perhaps we've got too much magenta in the image. And so again, we just slowly bring down the magenta. We're adding in more greens. But importantly, and I do this all the time, look away and just look at real life for a second, and then come back and look at the image again, because that is going to almost like refresh your eyes, so then you're able to accurately see what's going on in your image. And then sometimes you'll have selected an image and gone, yo, let me apply this preset, and it just looks muddy. There doesn't seem to be any differentiation between anything in the image. And often this is the case of your image being underexposed, because in order for our images to have that punch, there needs to be enough light, which then causes saturation or influences saturation, which then adds a lot of oomph to our image. And quite an easy tell is to look up at the histogram in the top right corner up here. If everything is off to the left hand side, suggests that there's nothing up here in the top right, it then means that we're probably underexposed. And so in order to give this image a bit of life, we need to increase the exposure. And so literally slowly bring it up. Keep looking at your images, because now at plus 25, remember, principles, not specifics, we are looking here, and this bit feels a bit too bright, but this bit over here still feels a little bit dark. And so it's important to then not try and keep on overexposing, because then the image just looks disgusting, but to slowly play with the balance, going, okay, it's a bit much here, bring it down. I like that. I often find that when I'm doing this though, it's important to then add back in a little bit of contrast, and you see how this image all of a sudden feels a bit more lively. And again, we are likely to also have the opposite, where I've got this image that I'm like, yo, this looks great. I apply my preset, everything feels washed out. Everything is lost its punch. It just feels like there's a sheen of brightness within it. And again, super easy fix, but it's important to start thinking, what is it about this image that when I've applied this preset has annoyed me or not done what I want it to do? And so in this case, everything's washed out. And when things are washed out, we're typically overexposed. And so we can reduce it. And again, a similar sort of thing. I always find that when I'm adjusting my exposure, bringing it up, dropping it down, play around with contrast after, usually add it back in. And so again, I'm like, cool, I now like the detail that I've got in the highlights. The blacks look pretty good, but it feels like it needs a bit more punch. Boom. As soon as we start adding in contrast, then it starts feeling like a cohesive, deliberate image, and that the preset does what it's supposed to do, creating that cohesive look across all of these different images. And sometimes we'll be shooting in environments where there is really bright elements and really dark elements. And as you can see here, I paste this preset, and again, it feels like, wow, I've got some parts of the image up here which are nearly pure white. I've got some stuff down here which is really dark, but I want to try and balance that out. And so we can do that by decreasing the contrast, because contrast brightens the bright parts and darkens the dark parts. And so if we reduce the contrast, we are lowering the bright parts and we are increasing or leveling up the dark parts. And so we can do this. We can then also do it more intentionally using the highlights tool. We can do that, and then we can brighten up the shadows. And now all of a sudden we've got an image where it feels like we can see a bit more detail and there's a bit more relevance and understanding of what's going on within the frame compared to as if we had just applied the preset raw. And now finally, this is more specific to me and my style, but I love cropping in, because cropping in, as you can see here, means that you can really try and communicate exactly what you want within the image, as opposed to just having a lot of dead space. And so what happens when we apply this preset? Sometimes it just looks a bit grainy and a little bit disgusting. And that often happens when we're cropping in, because we are reducing the resolution, but it's still trying to apply the same settings onto that lower res image. And so the fix, in my opinion, is scrolling down here and then reducing the grain. And so I still like the size, I still like the roughness, but it's just the amount. And you can see how all of a sudden it just makes the image feel a little bit more high res, a bit more high definition. And like I said at the start of the video, should you have any questions, everything is in a PDF that you can download on my website. And if you found that interesting, you may also find Street Tools another very valuable asset for you to help elevate your photography and to become the best photographer that you can be. So on that note, peace out, and see you in the streets.